Welcome to our 10th session. I'll introduce the faculty today. Our main faculty today is Dr. Pankaj. He is assistant professor at the Kasturba Medical College in Manipal, and he has done MD in palliative medicine from Tata Memorial Hospital, Mumbai. He is also the lead in the renal palliative care team of the Kasturba Medical College. This session will be co-facilitated by Dr. Shankar Prasad. He is the professor and head at the Kasturba Medical College in Manipal, and also he's part of the renal palliative and supportive care team at the Kasturba Medical College. Today's session by Dr. Pankaj and Dr. Shankar will be on renal palliative care, and it will be from 7 to 8. At 8, we'll have case presentation by Dr. Jaiswal. So over to you, Dr. Pankaj.
Um, Thank you so much, Gauriya. So nice to be here with you again. I will share my slide from here. Okay. Yeah, can you see my slides?
Yes, sir. Can you make it into presenter view? Perfect, sir.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you for being with us on Saturday evening for this series of lectures. Today, I will be talking about renal supportive care, which is very new in this field, but there is a huge need of palliative care integration in this field. So, what all are the concepts of palliative care that we will talk about? Started renal, I will go through that. So, in year 1930, we conducted CME palliative care in chronic kidney diseases, jointly held by
Dr. Pankaj, your voice is badly breaking. Can I off your video and we'll see?
Yeah, sure. 1 minute. Okay. Is it all right now?
It's better, sir. We will see if there is any problem in between.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you.
Let me know if my audible. I'm not audible.
Sure, sir.
So in 2019, Department of Nephrology and Department of Palliative Medicine (AMC) conducted one master class in kidney supportive care. It was held by Dr. Frank Bannon, who is a specialist in this field and currently practicing in Australia, and by guidance of Dr. Nandini Vallat and Dr. Ravin Prabhu, along with Dr. Naveen Salins and Dr. Shankar Prasad. Then after that, we started a clinic, twice a week clinic that is dedicated to hemodialysis patients and those patients who are coming to nephrology OPD. Any patients who needs palliative care, we see those patients and maintain a database. So it was possible with the help of a nephrology and team in our hospital. And now we have seen almost more than 50 patients in that clinic. So, and today's talk, our objectives will be some basic nephrology, epidemiology of various symptoms and what all sufferings these patients have. Then in brief, we will talk about what all measures we need to do to control these symptoms, and then how we can identify these patients in who may get benefit by integration of palliative care, and what all measures we need to do. Okay, so it will be a very brief talk on those things. After that, we can have some question and answer. So I have Dr. Shankar Prasad, sir, who is HOD of the Department of Nephrology at Kasturba Medical College. So thank you so much, sir, for being here.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. Please carry on. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so as we all know, chronic kidney disease, when we call it as chronic kidney disease, so any patient who has kidney injury for more than 3 months will be, or somewhere it's 3 weeks also, will be called as chronic kidney diseases. For classification, as like when do we call it as end stage renal disease? So if the patient, if their GFR is less than 30, then it will be called as end stage renal disease. It's been classified into 5 stages based on create clearance. And if it is severely low, that is means less than 30, then it will be called as end stage renal disease. These patients may be on the dialysis, may not be on the dialysis, and that depends on the patient's symptoms, how's the patient's urine output, what's the care clearance. So many criteria may be
Dr.
needed.
Pankaj, can I intervene, sir? Your voice is still breaking a bit.
I don't know whether it's the internet issue. Let me see once.
Sir,
We're talking about classification of chronic kidney diseases. So this, the dialysis depends. It's usually in the treatment in patients who have severe renal failure. That is called as end stage disease. Next slide. Yeah. So as we all know that a lot of drugs are excreted through kidney, and many drugs can also can cause renal damage. So we need to be very careful in selecting the right drug in these patients. So commonly, sorry, we will try here.
Pankaj, again your voice is breaking. You may mute and unmute again once, please.
Yeah, I'm very sorry for these interruptions because of internet, I think. Okay. So we all know that NSAIDs can damage kidney, but there are many other drugs also that can affect the renal functions. Commonly, sometimes aminoglycosides, the antibiotics that we use, bisphosphonates are commonly used in patients who have bony metastasis or bony pain, and that may cause tubular necrosis. Many chemotherapies may adversely affect renal functions. Sometimes few antihypertensives may also cause kidney injury. Is it still not clear? I'm sorry.
Voice is clear now.
Okay. And many herbal medications are used, alternate medications. Many drugs also that depends, their excretion depends on renal function. So what all the drugs that we need to be careful when we are using. So I think we all knows that morphine has a lot of excretion through kidney, and that kidney and that's why morphine should be avoided in end-stage renal diseases. Tramadol and tapentadol, it is excreted through kidney, but yeah, it can be used up to a limit in these patients. So maybe up to 100 mg per day of tramadol or tapentadol can safely be used. Other than some antibiotics, oral hypoglycemics, that depends on renal functions. Gabapentins and pregabalins also, if it is used in higher dose, its excretion may be delayed, and we need to be careful. What are the common drugs that we can use safely are fentanyl and methadone. Fentanyl, although its excretion is delayed, but and it can get accumulated if we use in very high dose, but still it can be used safely. So these are the drugs that are independent of renal functions and that can be used. Okay. Next slide, please. If we see in the epidemiology, we all know that India is the diabetes capital of the world, and diabetes is the most common cause for CKD. That's why we have a huge burden of CKD patients. Some patients, they get diagnosed with CKD, they comes to healthcare system, and many patients, they are not being diagnosed also, and they suffers with CKD. Among those patients who are on dialysis, around 15% of those patients dies every year. And when we see those patients who are elderly, more than 75 years of age, and are on dialysis, the mortality is still even higher. Next slide. Right now, CKD is 16th most common cause of death, but it is expected to be 5th most common cause of death by 2050, because now more lifestyle diseases, more patients of diabetes are coming up, and that may be the leading cause of death in patients. So the burden of CKD is going to be increased in these patients. Next slide, please. In India, if we see, as I said, that there are a lot of undiagnosed CKD patients. Even those who have been diagnosed, there are very few who have access to renal replacement therapies. And with now a lot of government centers coming up, or NGOs providing the dialysis facilities, very few only they stays on dialysis. A lot of people, they leave dialysis, somehow they cannot continue on dialysis, maybe because of multiple reasons, because of finance, logistics, or maybe because their symptoms were not very well controlled. Some of them goes to some alternate therapies and all. So there are very few few percents of patients who get the renal replacement therapies. Next, please. And this is the trajectory of CKD, if we see. So there are two trajectory if you see in this. One is in the red and other is in blue. So if a patient of end-stage renal disease who is not on dialysis, their functional ability may be maybe well maintained for some time, but when there is a sudden drop in the functional ability, patient may not live for very long, and there will be very sudden, similar as to the cancer trajectory. But in those patients who have access to dialysis, and their functional ability may be preserved for a very long time, but when they may have some acute episodes, and then they may need intensive care, and after some time they may recover, but over the time their functional ability worsens. So that is the second trajectory. In both trajectory, the end may be very sudden, and we may not have much time. That's why it's been told, like, we need to integrate palliative care as early as possible. Next slide, please. If we see for CKD, the treatment starts when we diagnose CKD, even at the risk, those who are at the risk. So those patients who are at risk, we try to prevent CKD or slow the progression of it. So early diagnosis, treatment of comorbidities, diet modifications, or adjusting the medications, stopping NSAIDs or other OHAs. Then and the treatment of complications because of CKD, that may be electrolyte imbalance, that may be sepsis, or bone diseases and all. those patients who are at end stage renal disease, they may require some renal replacement therapies. So most commonly, the dialysis. Dialysis can be abridged to transplantations. Those who are fit for transplant, they have some donors, can go for transplantations. And but the palliative care can be included at any point of time from the diagnosis till the end of life care. Next slide, please. Along with that, even with the treatment options, these are usually very, very expensive, and a lot of people may not be able to afford these things. So there are a lot of expenditures associated with this, even if they have access to the treatment. Next slide, please. So, as I said, advanced kidney disease is not an asymptomatic. These patients have a huge burden of symptoms. There are complications not only of dialysis, not only of CKD, but also there may be a lot of complications of dialysis also. Many times, clinicians, they assume that there will be more favorable prognosis rather than the justified prognosis. For many patients, dialysis may not be an option. Dialysis may not be the best to renal transplantation, and they may be on dialysis for very, very long time. And dialysis may not transform their life. The treatment. Sometimes it is only the palliative treatment. It may improve some of the symptoms or may give some extra years to live. Next slide, please. So coming to our next objective, what's the symptom burden in these patients? Next slide, please. So as we know, kidney is not just a filter that makes the urine or excrete the toxins. It is involved with many functions. So like the sodium and water balance, other electrolyte balance, elimination of nitrogenous waste. It produces erythropoietin that is responsible for production of hemoglobin. It is responsible for acid and base balance, and it is responsible for activation of vitamin D, that is very important in bone metabolism, and also for phosphate eliminations. These all rule, if it is being affected because of CKD, patients may develop different symptoms. Next slide, please. So this is one of the table from Harrison, which shows many abnormalities that is because of CKD. Here, I donates those symptoms that improves with dialysis, while P donates those symptoms which may persist or even progress on the dialysis. And D in red donates these symptoms or these symptoms may sometimes worsen in the patients who are on dialysis also. So you can read it later. Yeah. Next slide, please. So the common symptoms may be because of the multi-system disease that is involved in CKD patients. So these patients are at increased risk of stroke, that can be ischemic or hemorrhagic stroke. Patients develop a lot of heart-related diseases. Ischemic heart disease are very common because of high comorbidities in these patients, or because of CKD itself. And they are at risk of pericardial diseases and heart failure because of this. These patients have immunocompromised state and are at the risk of recurrent sepsis. Fistula failure is very common in those who are on hemodialysis. Pancreatitis is very common. They may have crisis pre-transplant, during transplant, or post-transplant infection or rejections. DVT, peripheral neuropathy, is very, very common, maybe because of the diabetes, or because of CKD itself, or sometimes because of the dialysis. Patients with CKD have peripheral vascular diseases that leads to ischemic ulcers or gangrene in these patients, and may have severe claudicating pain in these patients, or neuropathic pain also. And these patients have bone disorders because of altered bone metabolism, and that may lead to very, very severe persistent bony pain. Apart from that, there are other systemic symptoms. A lot of patients on CKD have a depression that may be undiagnosed or diagnosed and depression, and that needs to be evaluated. These patients, because sometimes they are on protein restricted diet and may not be able to take much water or other fluids, and because of the kidney diseases, they develop cachexia, or because of the failure, they may have edema, also facial edema. A loss of taste is very common, and they also have nausea, vomiting because of the uremia, breathing difficulty because of the heart disease, and CKD, they have pulmonary edema developing, and that leads to persistent breathing difficulties. Then recurrent abdominal pain, maybe because of the peritonitis in patients who are on peritoneal dialysis, or pancreatitis may lead to abdominal pain. Itching is very, very common in these patients, and those patients who have iron deficiency anemia may have restless leg syndrome also. Next slide, please. So this was a small study we did in some of our patients who were on hemodialysis. We did this study on around 85 patients. Next slide, please. Where we found to have, there were a lot of symptoms in these patients, undiagnosed symptoms. A lot of patients had pain, around 50% out of them. Around 20% had moderate to severe pain. Fatigue, lack of appetite, restless leg syndrome, poor mobilities, sleep disturbances, pruritus. It was in almost around 40 to 60% of patients, and around 1/3 of them had breathing discomfort. So this is in those patients who have a good access to healthcare system. If we see in those patients who are in community, those who doesn't have access to healthcare, or those who are at dialysis centers where only technicians are available, nephrologists are not available, clinicians are not available. Even these symptoms, the incidence of these symptoms may be much, much higher. Next slide, please. Apart from the physical needs, there are a lot of communication gap they may have. As I said, they may have a lot of financial problems. So in our study, around 50% of them felt like their financial needs were not addressed properly, and around 80% of them, they felt like they were spending significant amount of time in healthcare facilities. So most of these patients are on twice-weekly or twice-weekly dialysis. They need to come from their homes and spend around full day in healthcare facilities. If they are on, is it clear, Gauriya? Yeah. So they need to spend a lot of time in healthcare facility. This is when they are doing well. If they develop any complications, then again and they have to be get admitted, and that's why they and their family members had to spend a significant amount of time in hospitals. Okay, next slide, please. Some of symptoms, as I said, that it may improve with dialysis, but there are some complications that may arise during dialysis also. So a lot of patients, they develop hypotensions, cramps, nausea, vomiting, headache, chest pain, or breathing difficulty during dialysis, back pain, itching. Itching is very common during dialysis, maybe because of dialysate and all. And some of them develops fevers and chills because of this. So these can be the complications of dialysis. Next, please. Then how can we manage these symptoms? Next slide, please. So here I will put a small case story where which the patient I had seen around a few days back. He was a 66-year-old male. He had diabetes, and he was diagnosed to have CKD around 5 years ago. He was on weekly dialysis, but he used to complain that he has persistent itching all the time. And sometimes it is very, very severe, and that severe that sometimes he felt like it's better to end my life also, and that severe itching. Also, he complained of severe burning sensation in both feet because of the diabetic neuropathy he had. Next slide, please. So these patients, as I said, the pain is very, very common. It can be because of musculoskeletal pain, because of the bone disease, renal osteodystrophy, carpal tunnel syndromes. And it can be persistent pain in these patients. Sometimes this pain may be related to the dialysis procedure, the fistula site pain. Very commonly, as in this patient also, there may be neuropathic pain because of peripheral neuropathy. There can be ischemic pain because of peripheral vascular disease. Angina, they may develop. And sometimes because of polycystic kidney disease, they feel abdominal pain. These patients may have secondary malignancies or calcified axis that can be a very, very painful condition. Next slide, please. So pain management is important because it is quite prevalent that the symptoms is very, very prevalent. But it has been noted that there is under treatment of this symptoms, and that affects the quality of life. Why is it so? Because many a times patients do not complain in the fear that the pain medications will lead to further damage of kidney. And also many times, even if it is being reported, it's not very well controlled because physicians are also afraid of using many medications or analgesics in these patients. Next slide, please. So if we go for pain management, what are the common principles? So we need to assess pain fully. What all are the reason of pain? Not only the physical reason, there may be some psychological psychological components of pain also, and that's why we need to assess the pain fully. We can use same WHO analgesic ladder that we will talk. As I said, codeine, morphine should not be used because it is excreted renally. We can use other adjuvant analgesics as per WHO ladder also. Sometimes in patients with end-stage renal disease, we can use NSAIDs also, but it has to be used for very short period, and in those patients only whom there is no kidney function preserved, like those patients who are anuric, but it should be used only for a very short term. Next slide, please. So this is WHO's step ladder of analgesia. So step 1, if it is a mild pain, we can use paracetamol up to 4 gram per day can be used. In patients whom this is not controlled for with step 1, then we can go to step 2, where we can use tramadol or tapentadol up to 100 mg per day. We can safely use in these patients, and we need to monitor these patients for the side effects like drowsiness or vomiting, hallucinations, and these should be used. If patient's pain is not controlled, then we can go for step 3, that is strong opioids. Strong opioids, usually fentanyl, buprenorphine, or methadone are the drugs that can be safely used. In patients who are not in end-stage renal disease, even smaller doses of morphine can be used, but as far as we have other medications like fentanyl or methadone, we should avoid using morphine in those patients. Adjuvants, if we see, so adjuvants we should start at very small dose, and then we can go to higher dose or slowly according to the pain relief. So amitriptyline can be used. Gabapentin is a preferred drug. So gabapentin, we usually start with 100 mg night time, alternate day, and then slowly we can increase. Similarly, pregabalin can be started with 25 mg alternate day or after dialysis, and then it can be increased to 50 mg after dialysis, or then daily 50 mg. But the thing is, we need to start it more slowly. Next slide, please. Then there are other symptoms that is very common because of the uremia. So as I said, pruritus, and these patients also pruritus was persistent. And this pruritus is not histamine independent. So that's why common antihistaminics cannot be used. They are largely ineffective. Okay. So we need to see what's the reason. Most commonly, it is because of the uremia that is there. So we need to see whether the adequate dialysis is going on. The PTH level, we need to see calcium and phosphorus should be managed adequately. Many times it is because of the dry skin in these patients. Sometimes there are very low dry weight that can also lead to dry skin. So some topical agents we can use, like normal oil or moisturizing cream can be used in these patients. Some non-pharmacological therapies like general educations about pruritus management. So if you want to see these all things, we can go through some of handouts that can be given to those patients. It is available in our Journal of Palliative Care, Indian Journal of Palliative Care. We have recently published those guidelines, what all management we can do. So you can read those guidelines on in the journal. Okay. Then recently there are a lot of level 1 guidelines on use of gabapentinoids in these patients. So pregabalin, which can be used 25 mg after dialysis, and then increasing slowly, will also help in uremic pruritus. So in these patients, I had started pregabalin that helped him in both pruritus, also in neuropathic pain. Okay, next slide, please. So then other common symptom is restless leg syndrome. Many times it is because of iron deficiency anemia. So we need to see what's the patient's iron level, ferritin level in these patients. And then we can treat it with intravenous iron, maybe every week or sometimes twice a week also. we need to treat hyperphosphatemia in these patients, and we need to see if and these patients are on any drugs that can cause restless leg syndrome, and that can be stopped. Again, gabapentinoids are helpful in these patients, and that can be started. Or those vitamin C, vitamin E, pramipexole is also useful in these patients. Next slide. Then nausea and vomiting, it's very, very common because of uremia or dyselectrolytemia. Sometimes hypercalcemia may lead to very severe vomiting. So it is very common symptoms. Sometimes many drugs can cause vomiting, like OHAs, opioids, SSRIs. These all can lead to vomiting. A commonly used drug is, we can use a small dose of metoclopramide because sometimes the uremia also lead to gastroparesis, and there is a delayed gastric emptying. So we can use metoclopramide, and that is a smaller dose, 2.5 mg every 4th hourly, 6th hourly, or delayed released metoclopramide can also be used. If it is very severe, then smaller dose of haloperidol or olanzapine can also be used, but we need to be mindful about restless leg syndrome. Next slide, please. Then dyspnea, as I said, a lot of patients may have dyspnea, maybe because of the cardiac failure, maybe because of the fluid overload, or because of the cachexia and all. So we need to treat the cause. Anemia is very common in these patients, infections they develop, or sometimes they have anxiety because of their illness. So all these things need to be identified. Our common non-pharmacological, as told in earlier seminars, those things we can use. And then our last resort is still persistent, then we can use opioids. So opioids, both fentanyl and morphine, can be used. Morphine, we all know that it helps in managing persistent dyspnea, refractory dyspnea. But as we know, it should not be used, or it should be best avoided in these patients. Then fentanyl also helps in reducing breathlessness. So we can use transdermal patches or infusion subcutaneous or IV infusion of fentanyl can be used. Even in these patients, if they are on, if we suspect that these patients may not have many months to live, we can start a very small dose of morphine also. So maybe I had started for few patients in a dose of 0.5 mg BD also, or before dialysis for some patients if they develop dyspnea. So 0.5 mg to 1 mg can be started. Next slide, please. Then depression, as I said, it's very, very common in these patients, and many times it is not diagnosed. So proper evaluation of depression, and then counseling and pharmacological methods should be used in these patients. Next slide, please. So this was in brief about the symptom management. Again, if you want to read more about that, I will share one of the article that is for symptom management in end-stage kidney disease that you can read about. Then for next 5-6 minutes, I will talk about identifying a patients with for whom renal supportive care can be more important. Next slide, please. So here I had one patient who was 85-year-old female. She was hypertensive, IHD, and she developed heart failure. And she was on dialysis for last 5 years. She was belonging to very poor social status, and she was on twice dialysis. She was advised to have one more dialysis because of the heart failure, but she said that they cannot afford extra dialysis per week. She had persistent breathlessness that develops usually after 1 day of dialysis. She had chronic pain also, and she was almost bedbound and was fully dependent on activities of daily living on her daughter. But when we spoke to her, she said that she doesn't want to be a burden on her daughter, but she fears that if she stops dialysis, she will develop severe breathlessness, and that was her main fear. So in this patient, we spoke to the patient, we spoke with family members, and we decided that we will try to continue dialysis, twice weekly dialysis with adequate symptom management. So in this patient, I had started a very small dose of dialysis. Next slide, please. A small dose of morphine. So how do we identify patients who can be considered for conservative management or renal supportive care? Next slide, please. So we have early prognosticate. Previous slide, sorry. Yeah, a proactive identification guidance, which gives us 3 steps identification process in these patients. I think it might have been discussed in earlier slide also, earlier seminars also. At same, I will talk about the kidney diseases. So it enables us to identify early about those patients who have chronic suffering and may need palliative care. It recognizes the anticipatory needs of these patients, and then we can tailor the care for these patients according to the needs. So there are 3 steps. Next slide. First step is the surprise question. That is, would you be surprised if the patient were to die in next year, months or weeks? If a physician says, no, I will not be surprised, then that patient is eligible for palliative care. Next slide, please. Then there are general indicators like physical decline. There are repeated unplanned admissions or presence of significant comorbidities, declining performance status. And these all are indicators that patients' needs are increasing day by day. Next slide, please. And then there are specific indicators related to CKDs. So like if patient has more than 3 admissions in the last 1 year, or many ICU admissions patients are requiring. Patient have poor tolerance to dialysis, even with change of modalities. Some patient who choose no dialysis option or conservative options, or has refusing for dialysis, requesting for withdrawal from dialysis. Or not opting for dialysis after failed transplant. These can be considered for conservative care. And those patients who have very difficult physical or psychological symptoms that is not responding to specific treatments. And also those patients who have symptomatic renal failure and have very severe symptoms. So these can be considered for renal supportive care. Next, please. In one of the study that was done in elderly patients who were more than 75 years, they have found like if we have some of the criteria like cachexia, presence of diabetes, heart failure, peripheral vascular disease, dysarrhythmia, active malignancies, or severe behavioral disorders, or totally dependent on others for transfers. These all things are poor indicators, poor prognosticator indicators. So we can use these criteria to identify the prognosis. But at large, it is very difficult to identify those patients and identify the prognostic indicators as such. So it's been recommended to
based on the symptoms of the patients or anticipatory needs, we can integrate palliative care and we can talk to them, and then we can evaluate their communication needs and all. Okay. Next slide, please. So when do we consider withholding or withdrawal from the dialysis? Next slide, please. So there was another study on where they did a comparative survival study in patients who were more than 75 years of age. Next slide. In that, they found that in general patient, there are a lot of survival benefit by the dialysis. But if those patients who have multiple comorbidities, including IHD in patients who are more than 75 years of age, there were no survival benefit of adding dialysis in those patients. So these patients who have who are elderly and have multiple comorbidities, we can also, if they are okay, we can counsel not to go for dialysis also. That can be an option. Conservative management can be an option without any much difference in overall survival. Next slide, please. So this is about the kidney supportive care. So in one slide, I have talked about kidney supportive care. Yeah. So kidney supportive care is extra layer of care where patients who are on dialysis or on conservative management can, in those patients, we can focus on their good symptom control, better communications with the patients, identifying their needs, advanced care planning, and advanced directives, and also providing a good psychosocial supports for these patients. And when there is deterioration over the dialysis, then we can recognize their end of life care needs and can provide them a very aggressive symptom control and terminal care in these patients. So that will include talking to the patients' family members, because a lot of these patients' family will have a fear that what will happen if dialysis is stopped. So in this patient, in this 65-year-old female, when during one of the dialysis sessions, she developed severe angina and found to have very poor ejection fraction. And at that time, we spoke to the family members. Family members had agreed not to go for very aggressive management, and they chose for end of life care. At that time, their main worry was, will she be have a very severe breathlessness or pain and all? And that time we had spoken. She had around eight child around, and we have spoken to their children, and we assured that we will try our best for best symptom management. And she expired after 4 or 5 days, but her symptoms were very well controlled. She didn't have breathlessness, and she had a peaceful end of life. Next slide, please. So these are the key points. I think we are out of time. We will take some questions. Next slide, please. This is one of the recommendations recommended for the readings. So this is KDIGO guidelines that was published after the KDIGO meeting on supportive care. So this you can read. This gives a short of whatever we discussed in this. Apart from that, whatever there are special supplement in Indian Journal of Palliative Care that was published in May 2021. Next slide. Yeah, so that you can read. It's available on website also. It will give the Indian context of renal supportive care, especially the symptom management part and advanced care planning, shared decision making. You can read through that. Yeah. So that was all about renal supportive care. I'm sorry for all the interruptions you had. Uh, uh, yeah, we can take questions here.
Thank you, Dr. Pankaj, for the very informative session on renal palliative care. We have some comments and questions in the chat box. The first one was you mentioned that NSAIDs should be used for short term in renal failure. So, what is exactly short term?
Yeah, usually 3 days we use. And there's no definition of short term, but usually we use for 3 days when there is acute severe pain, and we try to manage pain with other NSAIDs, not NSAIDs, other weak opioids medications or adjuvants. We try to manage with that. Usually we use it for 3 days.
Also, somebody has asked about use of methadone for dyspnea in renal failure. Dr. Anne has already answered this, but I would, if any of our faculties would like to give their opinion about this, any inputs from our faculties regarding this specific query.
Methadone, I'm not aware of any evidence of use in dyspnea, but yeah, I will be interested to know if someone knows
Dr. Anne, Dr. Rajgopal sir, or Dr. Shankar, any inputs from you?
The proposed reason that morphine works for dyspnea is its effect on mu receptors in the lungs. So there would be no reason that methadone wouldn't work, but there are no specific studies that I'm aware of on methadone. So I think a trial of low-dose methadone reinforcing the reason that we should all be comfortable with methadone is quite indicated, and would be less likely to have side effects that morphine or tramadol might have.
Thank you, Dr. Anne. Yeah, it would be interesting to do such a studies on methadone also. Yeah, that's an important point.
Dr. Sunil, any inputs from you?
Hello, Bhairavi. I agree with Dr. Ann regarding the same. And I have used methadone in some patients with renal failure for treatment of dyspnea. And I have seen good effect, but I think this need to be proved.
Thank you. We have one more question from Dr. Nilima. She has said, could you explain again about conservative kidney care at the end of life without dialysis? How do you treat breathlessness at this stage? Is it with morphine?
Okay. Yeah, it's about those patients who choose not to go for dialysis. Yeah, so it is important to sorry, I couldn't go much detail into the conservative kidney care in these patients. Okay, so and the end of life care will applies like for any other chronic diseases in renal patients also. So we have same approaches. First is treat whatever is treatable. Maybe there may be like electrolyte imbalance, and there may be some diet modifications in these patients, even like fluid, how much fluid they should take. Those all things may be required. We can use maybe Dr. Shankar may tell us more about the use of diuretics in these patients. Especially for symptom management, we use opioids also if there is breathlessness. I prefer fentanyl in these patients if maybe transdermal or subcutaneous infusion in patients can be used. If there are other symptoms like pain or pruritus in these patients, then those drugs can be used. I would like to ask Dr. Shankar also about other measures, like if some patients wants to chooses not to undergo the dialysis.
Yeah,
those-
regarding use of diuretics, Pankaj, like we can use diuretics. Yes, it significantly relieves symptoms, but we have to know that whether how much urine output they have. It depends upon the residual renal function. If the patient doesn't have much renal output, like especially on dialysis, as the dialysis vintage advances, the patient's output will come down. Then the use of diuretics may not really help in relieving the breathlessness. I agree with you, but finally it comes to the opioids, and the comfort with other symptoms will help them to have an peaceful end of life.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, so it's an important message is like if patients have some urine output, that means patients have some renal functions preserved, then we can use diuretics. But if there are no urine output, then there may not be any use of using diuretics. Then opioids may reduce the preload and also the breathing difficulties. One important thing that usually, like what we the evidence says, those patients who are not having any urine output because of CKD, if we consider withdrawal from the dialysis, the survival also reduces significantly. Usually it is around 1 week to 10 days around, and I think maximum it is 28 days of those patients not on dialysis. So we need to counsel for that it may also means that patient may not be able to live more, but our main focus will be on the symptom management, and we can provide adequate symptom management at that point of time.
Thank you, Dr. Pankaj. We have 3 or 4 more questions in the chat box, and if there's time left after the case presentation, we can surely take them. So since it's 8 o'clock, can we start with case presentation? And Dr. Jaiswal?
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, doctor, we can hear you.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'm Dr. Manisha Jaiswal. So I would be presenting a case on palliative care in kidney diseases. Next slide, please. The patient details, it was a 74-year-old male patient diagnosed with cancer prostate with deranged kidney function and having multiple bone mets. His presenting complaints were severe pain all over the body, low back pain with radiculopathy to both lower limbs, right was more than the left. He had a non-specific abdominal pain and nausea. History of illness, the patient had presented to the urologist 2 years back with urinary symptoms and pain in the perineum, and he was found to have a prostatic nodule. The urologist suspected a cancer and he was advised biopsy with further treatment. However, the patient did not comply and was under symptomatic and non-specific treatment elsewhere. Now, after 2 years, in April 2021, he again presented to the urologist with severe pain all over the body, and on investigation was found to have altered kidney function with multiple bony mets. The metastasis had spread all over the body to the skull, mandible, multiple vertebra, ribs, pelvic bones, scapula, intratrochanteric region of femur. On examination, on inspection, he appeared as a frail, malnourished, depressed elderly gentleman. And palpation of the abdomen, a non-specific vague tenderness was elicited. But the other test specifically for the low back pain, SLR and other things could not be done because of severe pain. And all the vital parameters like pulse, BP, they were within the normal limits. These were the investigations which were done. Creatinine was 2.9. The BUN was 65, GFR 40, all were slightly deranged. Electrolytes were also slightly deranged, specifically sodium was low. LFT was also slightly deranged. D-dimer was elevated. There were pus cells more than 50 per high power field in the urine. PSA was highly raised. Obviously, the patient had carcinoma of the prostate. This patient was not a diabetic, so the blood sugar was normal. A USG abdomen was done, and a right-sided hydroureter with hydronephrosis with enlarged prostate was found. And obviously, the bone scan showed the multiple metastases all over the body, again, in all these regions. So the patient was treated by the urologist, only symptomatic treatment was given, and he was then referred to palliative care as it was thought that the patient was no more required any urological opinion. Psychosocial aspects, the patient appeared very much depressed and apathetic towards his treatment process. He was not much interested in living. Husband, wife, they stayed in Kolkata, and the only son, he lived in Bangalore. Though they were financially stable, but they did not want to spend extra for their treatment. The patient did not want much because the cost was obviously much more. And he also was concerned about his wife after his death. Now, this is the list of the medications which were prescribed by the urologist. Netris, that is for the hyponatremia. Socril and Prohans, these are all given in kidney patients for protein requirement. Monurol is a phosphomycin, which is a kidney-specific antibiotic. Pantoprazole was given, syrup, Dufalac, Softovac, antihypertensives like Trinexavir, Prazopris XL, Aristozyme, Alprax, paracetamol, Buvular patch. So this was a whole list of medications which were prescribed by the urologist initially. When the patient came to us, the patient did not want to take so many medications. So we reduced most of the medications and we just started on a low dose of morphine. We gave pantoprazole and a very low dose of tramadol. Ultracet is a tramadol plus paracetamol combination. And paracetamol was kept on an SOS basis. Gabapentin was started. Zofar was given. And Dufalac was given, and the patient was asked to continue the antihypertensives. So the main concern with the patient was that he was worried about his wife because he had resigned himself to his fate and accepted that he did not have long to live. He thought that he had lived his life, had completed all his obligations, his son was well settled. But they had decided to stay separate from their son because they did not want to interfere in his lifestyle. So he was worried that after his death, his wife would have to, obviously could not stay alone and would have to then become dependent on their son. So that was his main concern. And at the moment, he did not want to take so many medications. So he had started becoming irregular in his medications also. And the concern for the treating doctor was the patient's attitude because he was apathetic. He did not want to take medication. So how to increase the compliance of the patient towards medications, towards future treatment. So that was a very big concern for us. So in summary, this was a 74-year-old male patient who was suffering from cancer prostate with a deranged kidney function, with multiple bony mets, and had presented with severe pain all over the body, especially low back pain with radiculopathy. non-specific abdominal pain, and nausea. A very depressed and apathetic towards his treatment. So the points to be discussed, but I feel that because the urologist, when I had a talk with the urologist, he seemed to be a bit angry on the patient for not getting the treatment, definitive treatment done earlier. According to him, if the patient had got a biopsy done and had been had taken treatment at that time, he would not have landed up with bony mets all over the body. So would definitive treatment earlier have had a better outcome for the patients? And since methadone, another point to be discussed, I think most of us have this problem that we do not have methadone availability. So what is the next best analgesic option? And again, palliative treatment was, the patient was referred to palliative care only because there was nothing to be done for the patient in urology. So, I mean, it is still considered to be a last resort. And the patient compliance, the problem with patient compliance was that patient was so apathetic towards his treatment. The patient had come to palliative care only once, and he did not come for the follow-up visit. It was only when we kept on inquiring about the patient, but the patient did not really want to have any further treatment because he felt that it was a wastage of time and money. And in the patient's prescription, also I would like a bit of discussion from the esteemed faculty that what other changes we could have done in his prescription, which was given by the urologist. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jaiswal. Regarding the discussion points, can we have inputs from our faculty? Dr. Pankaj, Dr. Shankar, Dr. Anne?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Manisha. Thank you for the excellent case presentation. It's a common case that we see in patients with CA prostate. They develop obstructive uropathy, and that leads to deranged renal functions also. Overall, they have bone metastasis and develop severe pain and all. Usually these patients are elderly, so those geriatric problems also they have. Very common problems that we face is. So first point I would like to ask from everyone, like what would be would the definitive treatment given earlier had a better outcome? Maybe I can ask like if palliative care been involved earlier, what could be a better outcome in those patients, like an outcome in the sense of the definitive treatment? If anyone wants to add in that.
As a nephrologist, I am not a neurologist, but it's a wish of the patient, means patient will be the center. That's what I can say. As per the definitive treatment we have at present, which is can be used to any age, irrespective of their status, is orchidectomy. Means either you surgically remove the testicles or treatment with the androgens. So that can be tried so that it can relieve a bit of his symptoms, either which you have started early or in the present thing also. It's one of the treatment indicated for CA prostate with mets. So hormonal therapy or orchidectomy, which is a simple surgery, would have been tried earlier also, or now, means whenever the patient comes to any urologist, it can be an option. Second, in this case, is not the definitive treatment. From our nephrology perspective, is already the patient's creatinine is high, and ultrasound shows an H1. If you leave him like this, means he will develop probably obstructive uropathy, which will be superimposed, and he will land up in severe uremic symptoms and signs. There also, we should, as a team, we should counsel and tell him about the option of putting a DJ stent, which is also a simple intervention, which can relieve his obstructive uropathy. So couple of symptoms which is related to uremia can be taken over from doing that, doing either stenting or putting a PCN and relieving the obstruction. So that's what I can say as far the treatment aspect is concerned. And analgesic option means it's finally I feel whatever the analgesics available, it may vary with the patient. So how a patient tolerates and how which analgesic gives a good relief to the patient, I think that will be the best option. We have to rotate among the drugs which we have. I don't think it's a single drug which will help for all. As a third question, why is palliative treatment considered a last resort? Actually, I think still it's in nascent stage in India. We ourselves as a nephrologist, after coming in contact with our palliative team, our palliative care team here started in our institute as an onco center. Then later on, Pankaj got involved and is interested in renal supportive care. And now we feel like it is essential. Means it's not for the end of life, because now all the nephrology team in our institute have realized that it's not just the end of life care. It has its own lot of components. So so having somebody who is expert in palliative, in renal supportive care, I feel even in all systems we should have. Means it will be good for the patient at the end of the day. So having another member in the team and as a team approach to the patient, sure, it will help, not in the last resort. I feel at the beginning only, irrespective of the etiology of the disease or treatment available. And regarding the last two questions from my side, what I can say is it purely we have to have, it would have been better, as the Pankaj told, the palliative care team would have been involved with the patient and the family early, and then they would have been in our confidence. Now it needs further discussions and communication to the patient. This is what my perspective as a nephrologist in this discussion.
Thank you, sir. You have covered all the points here, and yes, I think if we involve palliative care, as sir said, like there are still the treatment options that can that may not be very intense to the patients. A simple surgery, a small surgery, or a very some drugs for as a hormone therapy can also increase, that can be a definitive option and can improve the patient survival. As we know, CA prostate patients with metastatic CA prostate may also live for very long time, for many years also. So it is very important to involve palliative care at a very early stage, where we can provide them a good psychological supports, good symptom management, and can bring the confidence that they may live their life better. And once they have that hope that it's a symptoms free life they can live, they can go for the definitive treatment, even if they were refusing for those all treatment. So that's the basic fundamental of involving early palliative care or integrated palliative care. So if we have involved the palliative care team earlier, that would have a better outcome, as patients would have better symptom management. We could address his psychosocial aspects, where his depression or apathy might have been taken care of, and also for many medications that he doesn't want to take. So we can reduce his polypharmacy and the essential drugs that can be started in these patients. So if we see, there are some prognostic factors in CA prostate, maybe like Gleason score, his performance status, maybe the involvement of bony lesions. Those all things can be a good prognostic factors, and we can see into that. Then we can decide like if that patients may help with orchidectomy or hormonal therapies in these patients. Yeah. Second option, like there is a lot to discuss about the analgesics options in these patients. Yeah, if someone wants to add in that analgesics part. I'm sorry, I'm not able to see the chat part.
Dr. Pankaj, there is a comment in the chat box regarding the same thing. Dr. Manu John says if ibandronate or steroids can be tried, plus radiation to the site of highest pain, is it possible?
Yeah, so definitely radiation must be considered if it is a localized bone pain, but if it is some like widespread body pain, radiation may not be given for extensive bony lesions. But yeah, if there is any particular bony lesion that is maybe compressing on other structures or nerves, that can be used. Zoledronates or ibandronates, these all drugs have some limitations on when we are using in patients with deranged renal function. So if we see in this patient, his creat is around 2.9, and he is frail, elderly, 74-year-old. His creat clearance would be around 15 to 20 around. So we need to be mindful about using bisphosphonates, but yes, ibandronate still can be used for some patients. I don't know, maybe it may be risky for patients whose create clearance around 15. But as Dr. Shankar said, that we can go for DJ stenting if his performance status is good. Then we can, and if we are expecting that he may live for years, we can go for DJ stenting, and that may improve his create clearance also. And that time we can use ibandronate. Steroids can be used. He is non-diabetic. His sugars are under control. Steroids can be a very good options. But we should also go through our WHO analgesic ladder. So we are using morphine here. We can give a trial of morphine, that's not a problem, but maybe a safer medications like using tramadol, tapentadol in reduced dose, or fentanyl we should go for. That would be the safest option to go for fentanyl in those patients. And using paracetamol, we need to use a good dose of paracetamol, maybe 1 gram every 6 hourly we can use.
There was a comment in the chat box previously. Dr. Biju said, since we know all this, what are we doing for creating awareness among nephrologists? Can I request Dr. Shankar to please take this question?
Yeah, it's a good thing. Basically, it's still means the awareness is less because it was not there in the curriculum. Always people thought palliative care means onco perspective. So now I feel probably in next couple of years it will be better. Like in our own system now, we are including say for starting a renal supportive care. I feel you need a team. That team you should not expect always everybody having a nephrologist and a palliative care physician. It's good if we both are there. So what we are looking at is now we are training our dialysis technicians and the BSc and MSc students also. They are getting an exposure of what exactly palliative care in our CKD and dialysis patients. And through, I think Indian Society of Nephrology is also keen to put the palliative care in the curriculum of our DM students. Now, at least in our center, we are planning to post them in the palliative care so that the it's not just the renal, at least to know the components of palliative care and how a patient should be handled. I feel that will give not just because we as a physicians, we always go for the physical burden of the patient. We rarely go through the psychosocial or emotional aspect or financial aspect and other aspects of the patient in total. So sure, it will be an upcoming. So we are requesting it to include into the curriculum, and we are including basically the dialysis technicians and the transplant coordinators also, to get not just to look into the transplant coordinator for the renal transplantation, also look into the palliative care, so they can act as a bridge where they can take some of the burden if they are trained well. I hope the renal supportive care will come up in a big way, and because the CKD is there, and it will continue to increase irrespective of whether it's a developed or a developing country.
Dr.
I hope
Shankar.
I answered a bit.
Yes, I am sure this would bring about the much needed change. Dr. Ann wants to say something.
This is a fabulous conversation, and I am enjoying the chat. This is an unfortunate situation where I believe that if palliative care had been able to meet with the patient at the time of the diagnosis of prostate cancer, we may have been able to help them understand how early treatment would alleviate later suffering, and perhaps be not very costly, especially if hormonal manipulation had taken place early, even without surgery. But now we have a despondent, discouraged man who is in so much pain that he can't even engage. This is my interpretation. I would do a burst of steroids in this case to try to alleviate pain in this situation, simply because I think it would be pain relief without toxicity of some of the opioids that we use. And in addition, we might get some engagement from the patient. Sometimes they come back after that burst ready to engage with the medical field. This is a cancer that has some longevity to it. So he might be interested in nephrostomy tubes or a stent, as Dr. Shankar has mentioned. So just a thought that sometimes prostate cancer is exquisitely sensitive to steroids, and it might be a good way to relieve pain so that we can engage this patient with other alternatives. So I couldn't agree more that palliative care engaging early would have been helpful. And sometimes steroids in kidney, when people have, it is a good, maybe temporary pain relief. So this is all I have to say. I know that there are experts in the Indian context, and I'm surely hoping that the attendees go into the Journal of Indian Palliative Care and read that entire supplement. It looks fabulous.
Thank you, Dr. Ann. Dr. Bharat Paliwal wants to ask some question.
Good evening, all. It's not a question, it's just a comment. All questions have been beautifully answered by all our expert and excellent case presentation by the madam. The treatment, from my side, I feel the treatment was adequate. Whatever was lacking has been added by the expert. Just a point to make is that the urologist who had made a comment to the patient that he has delayed and he should have come early for this, probably that has also contributed to his mentality of not approaching for the treatment. So anyhow, the lack of awareness regarding the palliative care is there, and we are striving to propagate it. A small effort can be done to make the concerned person realize that what unknowingly harm he has done in the overall care of the patient. Because patient is already mentally depressed by the after hearing his news of a untreatable condition. And if the treating doctor makes a comment like this, that you had delayed it, you could have presented earlier, probably that also adds to the agony and the mental suffering. So when we are treating patient as a whole, we should also take care of the mental attitude and mental thought process which will be going after these comments. So this I just wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
waiting for long.
sure.
Yeah, but you gave me in the last minute. How can it be short? It's quite long. There's this one person who was missed in this whole discussion. Nobody saw a medical oncologist. Nobody discussed. This is a CA prostate is a slow-growing tumor, eminently treatable with hormones, even in a metastatic state. 35% increase in 5-year survival rate is there. Why was he not started on the cheap hormonal therapy? I'm not blaming anybody. He should have seen a medical oncologist, not a palliative care, not a urologist. A medical oncologist would have told this clearly. Bisphosphonates can be used in renal dose. 2 milligrams can be given. Zoledronic acid. We can use fentanyl patch for decreasing the pain. Why was all this not done? He should have been treated. This is one ideal case where palliative care takes over and care is not given because a medical oncologist is not seeing this patient. CA prostate with a lot of bone mets can still be treated, and with treatment, most of the symptoms will come down. It is just plain oral medications, bicalutamide or okay, abiraterone and so many others are there which are expensive. Forget about it. We can use simple hormone treatment. The PSA will drop. The PSA is more than 2,600. That means very active disease is there. You can give renal dose of bisphosphonate, 1 or 2 injections. You can start him on fentanyl dose. So I feel in this case, the person who should have seen the patient is a medical oncologist, not a palliative care person or somebody who knows about oncology.
Thank you, Dr. Hari Mohan. I'm sure this should have been taken into account, but as Dr. Jaiswal has said, the patient did not want to be treated. And
no,
also,
that is our duty to convince the patient without much expense. I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just telling for the discussion.
Of course.
They did a wonderful job. I'm definitely happy about it, but I'm just telling for the case because these are certain things we can still do. We don't need to immediately, have that feeling, oh, it is stage 4, metastatic, bone mets are involved, renal failure is there, can't do anything. No, in this case, especially in CA prostate, you can still do a lot. So only thing is we can convince the patient it's not going to be expensive. We can try it out, hormonal tablet. If you are feeling better, you continue. I'm sure they'll agree. Forget about samarium, or all these are very costly, I understand. Bisphosphonate is not very costly. We can use it as 2 milligram dose. We have used in renal failure, and it is quite effective. Of course, steroids, fentanyl patch, in a low patch, it would have helped actually. So
yeah, of course. As
Dr.
Shankar.
Just to add to the comment from my side is, he needs everybody. Medical oncologist team member. I mean, that's what I wanted to just
yes,
add.
Definitely. In this case, especially because it was eminently possible to be treated.
Yes, agree with you. Means it should be like, I think they would have asked him, and we don't know the past, whether the patient has been offered and whether they refused, we don't know. But as you told, yes, I agree. Means finally what I want to say is, in this case, everybody would have been involved in an early. If patient is willing, yes, he would have been got a better treatment.
Many of the cases this happens. Patients go off to alternate treatment and then they come back. But when they come, we have to see, what can be done. Very rarely in oncology can we do something. And this is one case where we can. That's why I told her that. Thank you.
Can I comment?
Yes, please.
Yeah, actually, the patient was referred initially to by a general physician. And when the patient came for the second time after 2 years, he was in a very bad shape. And the urologist thought that the patient had nothing much could be done. So he sent to a palliative care physician. And the patient attended the palliative care clinic only once. And he did not even want to be referred to any other physician or any doctor, or in fact, he did not want any treatments. He said that he was resigned to his fate and he did not want to spend much money. That is the reason he could not be referred anywhere else, because in palliative care, we actually, as you know, in most of the institutes, we do not have a team as such. These are all individual referrals. The patient is going from one doctor to the other, and there is no such team which can sit together and counsel the patient properly. But for the patient,
I think even a
plan-
palliative care physician will be knowing. I mean, if you just have a read up, you can know that hormone treatment is quite effective. And this is
the
something that we
patient,
can-
it was just one visit to the palliative care physician.
Okay.
So we were planning all of these in the later sessions, where we would have a rapport with the patient and then talk to him further about the further treatment. But the patient did not want any other treatment. He did not comply. He did not even come for the follow-up. That is the reason further treatment.
I understand. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, just
Thank
for
you.
educational purposes.
Right.
I think.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you
Yes,
so
yes.
much.
That is very
Uh,
much important. I
Thank you.
understand.
Thank you, Dr. Harimohan. Thank you,
Thank you.
Dr. Jaiswal. I suppose the key here is communication and early involvement of palliative care. So we are already well over our time limit, but I would like to add one thing here. Being palliative care physician is not just about knowing palliative care, but also a palliative care physician knows what is the oncology treatment, medical and others. He has an idea. And I'm sure in this case, the palliative care physician would have tried to communicate and convince the patient, but obviously the patient didn't wanted to go for treatment. But the point I wanted to insist is that a palliative care physician also knows about oncology, and it's not about referring only to palliative care and not referring to a medical oncologist. So we are well over our time limit, and this was a very good discussion. And thank you, everyone. So we'll meet in the next session, and good evening to all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you very
Shankar
much.
sir.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Paliamanja and Gauriya. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. We'll meet you with another session on next Saturday. Till then, bye.